that goes back to 1847 or thereabouts, when the Barossa Valley was first settled. Turkey Flat is the first property to be surveyed in the region, and we have the lovely title of Lot 1. The first owner of Turkey Flat was a chap called Fiedler, and in recent years he's really taken on the title as the muse of viticulture. He was sort of the person who was responsible for bringing grapes and propagating them and actually delivering them out to the major vineyards in the Barossa. When he first settled on the property, he went over to Sydney to the Busby collection. James Busby, for those of you who don't know, was employed by the Australian government to go to Europe to collect plants and trees, etc., that were going to grow in Australia. They then propagated them, and Fiedler brought a selection of those plants. Mark's just joined us.
Excellent. Welcome, Mark.
And so, as history says, he planted about 72 grape varieties on the property and other trees. From the most successful, he then distributed them to outgrowing grape growers. He continued growing grapes for the next 20 odd years, and then our family took over the property in 1860. They were butchers, and they continued grape growing, but then they developed a large butchery business on the property, hence the butcher's block wines, because we now, through our cellar door is the old butcher's shop, which is actually houses the butcher's, the chopping block, or the butcher's block. Peter and I purchased the property from the family in 1987. It was during a very fragile period of the wine industry when the vine pool scheme was on, so the Australian government were paying grape growers to pull vines out because there was no market for red grapes in Australia or Europe. And we could see we were going to lose that amazing history of this property. So we purchased the property. It took us 3 years to get it back into some sort of production. And in 1990, we made our first wine. So in fact, we're actually celebrating 30 years of winemaking this year, but we can't really celebrate how we would like to because of COVID. We've had to put it off a bit like the Olympics. We're going to, hopefully we have it next year.
I never forget, Christie, one of the first times we ever met in Singapore. You told me a fantastic story about, I think it was Boxing Day in Australia. It was soon after you guys released your first vintage, and everyone was sitting around having a glass of wine, and there was a ring at the cellar door, and nobody wanted to get up, and you said, oh, bugger it, I'll go and do it. And it ended up, those guys ended up being some of your largest customers to this day. And I think it's an inspiring story about that last doorbell that rings is often the very, very best doorbell. I've always remembered that.
Yeah, no, you've got the story a little blurred, but yes, in essence, yes, they did become very good. It was actually a shitty wintry day, and no one wanted to go and surf them. And they were a group of surfers that actually hired a camper van, and they used to go to various regions every year. But they were actually very famous surfers, and they owned Billabong and I don't know whether those labels, Mambo, etc. And I didn't know them. And I was filling out forms, and I'm looking at the names on the things, and I went, shares in your business, as I've got 3 sons, and they all love surfing. So they became great buyers. I don't know whether they still are. I must actually get...
Yeah, I think those brands might have been a little embattled over the last few years, but I think the moral of the story is don't judge a surfer by his board, that's for sure. In terms of the rat blend, has it been something that you've mixed around over the years in terms of defining the blend, or do you just respond to the vintage fruit quality every year? How do you approach that?
I'll put that to Mark, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's hard to answer as well. But I suppose we try to respond to the vintage. and we try to bring the most out of each of the varieties, or the 2 or 3 of the varieties that we use. We try and see what the strengths are from the vintage and try and make them in a way that really makes them speak. You've got the 17 white in front of you, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay. 17 was one of the cooler vintages we had in the Barossa for the last decade, which is fantastic for white. And I think what you're seeing there tonight is that the Barossa can make quite detailed, intricate and perfumed white, especially when you get a vintage that supports that. So in the 17, it's roughly 50% Marsanne. The Marsanne goes into some of the best oak you can buy. So 500 litre puncheons. So there's a subtlety to it. So it's quite large oak. The Viognier sees a few days on skins, which is quite rare, sort of in modern wineries. That's to bring up the aromatic component and the texture. And the Roussanne, I would change from vintage to vintage to see what I think the hole that needs to be filled in the wine. Vintage, it was because we had really nice perfume, we had really nice texture. It was just whole bunch pressed straight to stainless steel, just to give a little bit of mid-palate volume to the wine.
I think that mid-palate volume is really the money shot for me. I just love the density, then the layering, the silkiness in the mid-palate is just gorgeous. And I think it seems already to be evolving into that secondary stage, which is so seductive. It's really beautiful. All 3 varietals seem to be really coming together to speak in one voice. I think it's beautiful. It's really beautiful.
I'm really glad you're enjoying it. I mean, the danger with white Rhone varieties is they can get extremely viscous and thick and rich very quickly. I don't think you want to lean too far away from that, because that's showing thinking. But you need to be very delicate with how you handle the varieties so you actually get something that's drinkable and refreshing. Certainly, as you talked about, you're already seeing some development. That's coming from the Viognier that would spend some time on skins. So that's going to pick up some phenolics from the skins, which generally aids the wine a bit quicker. But that texture and that the oak and the roundness of palate is coming from the Marsanne, and the Roussanne's really delivering that mid palate.
I think what's so special about this is also it's holding the acid, so it's promising even more development. It's not something you need to rush hell for leather into immediately. I actually would be so excited to see this in 6 and 12 months, to see that evolution, because the acids are so beautiful. It's all pinned together with a beautiful spine. It's beautiful.
Yeah, glad you're enjoying it. I think when you make a white Rhone as well, like I worked in retail all throughout university, you don't get anyone coming to a bottle shop being like, what's your best white Rhone? You know? People who drink white Rhones are people who know a lot about wine. So you need to make wine that's detailed. So, because the people that are drinking it know their stuff, essentially.
I laughed today. When I was preparing the decanting today, the sommelier in the restaurant that we work with came in. She said, if one more person orders a bloody bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, I'm going to chuck it at them. She had absolutely had it. And I kind of laughed, because that seems, in retail, that's still the going thing, no matter where in the world you go.
I agree. Sauvignon Blanc free zone.
Yeah, I agree, Mark. Thank you. I guess with an eye on time, we should maybe move towards the rosé. Just a word on that white.
There's a nice Silex to be bought though on the auction today.
Oh,
nice.
did you take those?
No. But don't condemn Sauvignon Blanc too quickly.
Hey, I'm in my 60s. I'm not going to enjoy it any other time.
There's a Dagenot Silex on the auction. That's going to be.
Yeah, I've actually been there before he died. I think he died, didn't he?
Oh yes, 2 years ago.
I went there several years ago. The guy's completely wired. I mean, seriously.
Absolutely, completely.
Guys, we should. I'm just mindful of time. We've got to let
Sorry for the comment.
No, it's fine. Moving to the rosé. If I have it right, this is your 27th year, guys, of the rosé. I remember years ago, Christie, you telling me that there was a bit of pheno in the rosé. Is that right, or is this pure? Sorry, is it 100% Grenache now?
It's 100% Grenache, yes.
Okay, I don't know where I got that information from.
We tell people 100% Grenache.
I think what hey, yeah.
It was a blend.
Okay.
When we first started selling it, it was a blend, but now it's purely Grenache, or essentially Grenache. Yeah.
I think one of its strongest selling points, aside from the fact that it's beautiful, is the fact that it's a purpose-made Grenache rosé. Whereas I think even today, 20 years after the first time I tried to persuade a football player to buy a bottle of rosé in Singapore, and it didn't go well. The consumer market's changed a little bit since then, but certainly one of the selling points for Turkey Flat Rosé has always been for us that it's made to be a rosé. It's not just something that's left behind after the press or inferior fruit, etc. And year after year, it's got more and more superlative. I think it's absolutely beautiful. I think what strikes me immediately is the sense of poise in the wine and a beautiful crunch. There's a wonderful texture to it now. It's possibly not as dry as previous years. Am I right with that? Or is it just me having a quick stab at it tonight?
I think you're probably just seeing the primary fruit. You've just got to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
It's been pretty consistently dry for about 4 or 5 years.
Mm.
And I think if Mark, you're talking about purpose-built rosés, I think when Mark started making wine for us in 2008, I think he was shocked at the intensity of coming into vintage and what was actually required to deliver this wine.
Exactly as it is.
Yeah, but it's an intense thing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an absolute market leader in Australia. Everyone knows the Turkey Flat Rosé, and so it's a large volume of what we make in the winery, and it's what takes up the most of our time. As I said, it's a market leader. It's very popular. So,
and it's interesting, Robert. It's not a summer drink anymore. We release it as quick as we can onto the market as soon as we've got it. So it comes out usually May, June, as early as we can. And we don't see any sort of major blips. It just keeps rolling through. People drink it all seasons. It's extraordinary, really.
I think the nuance of the red fruit is so beautiful in it. Nothing's overstated. The presence is there. There's a beautiful steeliness to it. It's really, really beautiful. I'm a massive fan of this. Mark, somebody called you the dead set expert at producing Grenache. Somewhere in my notes. Yeah. The guy was waxing on as you were the leader in Grenache, and I think you're certainly showing it in this rosé. Really, really, really great. I always laugh at the New Zealand producers because everything's so serious there, and it's always about Pinot and Chardonnay, and they get so annoyed when their rosés outsell everything else that they produce. It's always seen as the red-headed stepchild of the production run. And they always get annoyed that that's the first thing that anybody buys, and no one approaches their very serious Pinots at 15 times the price. But and I think that's the distinction here, is you guys see it as a part of what you produce, and it's certainly showing that way. Really beautiful.
Yeah, the guy that wrote that review, he's one of Australia's better critics, but he's one of the critics to openly say there is a very big difference between good rosé and bad rosé.
Oh yeah.
And it needed to be said, because there's like any wine style, there is a difference. It can be good and it can be bad. So it's great that he put his head out there and say it can be good, and who's doing it well is us. It was really nice recognition. He's also got a phenomenal palate, that guy. We say this is 100% Grenache. It's actually about 97% Grenache. We have a little tweak of skin contact white for that mid-palate texture.
Oh, yeah.
And I reckon that's what that builds in with the primary fruit to give that sort of glossiness on the palate that you might see as sweetness.
Gotcha. Okay.
We do it with white, so it's Marsanne, so it doesn't add to the colour. Obviously, if you're chasing that texture with red varieties, what you get is a colour build-up as well as a different sort of phenolic build-up as well.
Yeah.
It also So it's very, very subtle. We have about 1% barrel fermented Marsanne in it, and that's just to add a little sulphide lick on the nose. So you've got all that primary fruit, but there's a nice little punch of flint and
flourish. Yeah. Yeah, one of the critics wrote about smoky gun cap, and that's, I'm sure, is what he's referring to in terms of that lick, that little bit of smokiness. I've been searching for it vociferously, but clearly my nose can't pick up that 1%. I'll keep trying though, very happily.
Yeah, keep going. I'm sure your evening will get better.
I mean, it's really an important point that you make about there being a very big gap between good and bad rosé. You know, this whole phenomenon of Provence rosé. You know, these days, if you call it, smack the word chateau on the front, put Provence and south of France on the bottom, you can charge some enormous prices, and we're seeing that divergence in quality as well. The very, very top, and then just a lagoon of rosé that's just being punched out in the south of France at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the Butcher's Red. So 95 points from Halliday, Shiraz dominant, and the notes seem to dance a little bit around the 150-year-old vines. I'm sure it's just a fraction of that particular vine production, right?
Yeah, so in the 17 year, it would be a small proportion, but it would have a fair proportion, probably 10 to 20% of 120-year-old Grenache vines.
Also, all those Shiraz the other later plantings come from cuttings from those old vines, so they're all related to it. And it's
well, it just begs the question: how on earth can you guys produce quality like this from history like that at this kind of price point? It's really extraordinary when you look at it. I mean, I'm shooting my system by asking that question, but it really, really defies belief that you can do that.
I say to Christie, why don't we just give it away?
Yeah. Wouldn't have to pay the wet then, that's for sure.
We don't rise the price, but we're actually controlled by so many different factors. It's just extraordinary. And I've been sitting looking at pricing today. But it over-delivers and gives people a lovely feeling of comfort.
Yeah, you know, I having been in Singapore now for I think it's 12 or 13 years, we see these cycles of people that have come in and out. And in fact, some people are on their third cycle back in Singapore now. And I have to say that if they were branded Butcher's Block consumer back in 2006, they're coming back again as a Butcher's Block consumer. It's quite interesting. They'll go to Sweden and they'll go back to Sydney and then they'll come here. And it's something that seems to sit in people's memory palettes as something that they want to go back to again and again. And I can certainly see why. I think this beautiful velvety glossiness on the palate is so entrancing, really, really good. I'm actually scared to see what the price is these days, but it hasn't moved much since we first sold it in 2007.
Yeah, I think that the price doesn't do it service because people get suspicious around that price. Other than it is, they go, it looks so nice, it must be tricked up, and it's not. It's just extremely good quality fruit, handled really well in the winery. And it consistently, well, it's probably not too relevant in Singapore, but all our wines are very distinguished on the show circuit in Australia, including this one. And it consistently outperforms wines that are double to triple its price. And again, growing, they say, what are you doing? You say, it's just good fruit. We're growing it tough, we're yielding it low, and then we're protecting it all the way through the winery. And that's what you're getting in the bottle. It is just...
With the vines being that old, the yields must be a fraction. There must be just, nothing coming off them. Do you see a time period when a little bit like Prue and Stephen Henschke talk about Hill of Grace getting to a stage where it simply is not economic to produce anymore? Do you see that risk in your heritage vines ever getting to that point?
For sure. I mean, if you were to incorporate land value, if you were to assess the winery as a business and incorporate land values and what it would take, then I would say already that. It's because it's been in the family for so long. That's the reason that we can put the price on the bottles that we do.
Got it. Yeah.
Probably it's not a proper model.
Well, it's heroic that you can get that quality into this bottle at this price point. I can't think of anything that comes even close to it out of all the Australian stuff that we see.
We have a model in Australia, Robert. It's probably different in Singapore, where if you want a wine poured, and this is a great pouring wine, it has to land at a certain price, and
Got it.
you don't get a look in otherwise, unfortunately. So we're sort of controlled in that way. You give people discounts and they kamikaze it in their bottle shops.
Yeah. I've always been a little scared of point of sale wine sales. That's why we are fiercely consumer only. I think we've got about 5 restaurants that we have as clients and about 9,000 consumers. And we're happy to stay that way and deal straight to consumer. Definitely something that we've retained as a focus. All right. Shall we?
One of your consumer, or one of your customers that was actually I met first in Singapore is now a mail order customer of ours in Atlanta, Georgia.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. I love to hear that.
Him?
What's his name?
Mark Davies.
Yes, I remember Mark. Yep.
Yes. No, so he's 4 bars away. Yeah.
You probably find a couple in Canada as well, which is they're big fans. Yeah, Lou, the 3 is the SGM, the butchers. So now on to 4, the Mourvèdre, Monastrell, Mataro, depending what you call it.
Okay. Yep. I brought the Grenache in, but I'll bring the.
So the Mataro is a tiny make for us each year. It's not a large volume for us at all. And I really do react to the vintage to try and make sure I sort of bring out the best of it. Because it's a small volume, we don't have to be very consistent in style. We just have to make an interesting style that's representative of variety and the vintage. In 18, we had a warm vintage, which meant we could produce quite a rich wine. Over the years, we've gone with a much earlier bottling of Mataro. I find Mataro can go savoury very quickly, and what I wanted was for that to happen in bottle rather than it happen in the cellar and then put it to bottle. So we bottle this after about 9 months in oak, and then probably about 3 or 4 months in bottle, and then we release it. So it's quite different. Sometimes I use whole bunch, sometimes not, and this one I didn't. The interesting thing is this comes from our Stonewall block, and it has a very distinctive like sarsaparilla or sort of licorice sort of note to it. I don't know if you guys are getting it or not. But
looking for that. I'm not seeing it immediately, but maybe the others are.
Yeah. It just smells like licorice to me.
I used to file it.
Yeah, nice bit of prettiness. Yeah.
What sort of alcohol level is in this? Because I'm not getting any major fire off it. It seems to be quite contained.
Our alcs are quite low.
So it's about 14, is it?
Yeah. I often actually put a slightly higher alcohol on the labels, so not to scare people. We grow because they're the thing that Brosser and they want that richness. But we grow our vines quite intensely. We stress them so we get the flavour intensity early so we can pick early, and then we get freshness for the life of the wine. A lot of the temptation in the Brosser is to crop up, then let the sun do its work for concentration and put that in bottle. And that's when you start to get those really high alcohols that the Brosser is associated with. I think I've got 14.1 on this. Well, thereabouts, but from memory, it was actually high 13s. So that's why there's no heat there. But there's no lack of intensity or freshness or varietal character with it because of that stress.
Got it. In terms of cellaring, how do you guys see this running?
I know a lot of winemakers will say this. For the last 5 years, all our wines will sell exceptionally well. It's really up to the consumer as to when you like the secondary characters to overtake the primary characters.
Gotcha, yeah.
Because we've captured this quite young, it means that it will stay fresh in bottle. If you're looking at this in 20 years in the bottle, you'll still see a wine that's much fresher than a lot of other competitors' wines. I think the superstar of our cellaring wines is our Grenache. And really, you could realistically be saying 50 years' time, that'll be showing up other wines, just because of the pedigree behind it. But yeah, the Mataro can comfortably go 10, 20 years. It depends on the drinker.
I'm casting my mind to the Spanish examples of the grape, and certainly more robust, blockier, doesn't have the kind of nuance and maybe joie de vivre that this has. There's a lightness about it. There's a lightness of spirit in the wine, which is really attractive. It's not knocking you over. It's not challenging you, but it certainly has some gravitas to it. I kind of like those two aspects to it.
Christie, what's the age of the Mataro vines?
These are about 25 years.
Does anyone else make a straight Mataro out of the Barossa?
Quite a few now.
Yeah.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah. The oldest vines have come from Schultz. He's got a 170-year-old, 160-year-old patch.
So Mark doesn't know Lou's Robert's partner.
Okay. Oh yeah, Mark meet Lou.
Nice to meet you.
It's amazing the video things.
So Robert, I don't know how sort of fussy your Singapore customers are, but we're becoming much more pedantic about recommending temperature that people drink these wines at. More so every year, and it doesn't it? They need to be at a proper cellar temperature.
Yeah, you lose all the fun out of a warm red, that's for sure.
Yeah. They're just not.
I mean, well, happily, my fridge is right behind the flag, so I don't have far to run. But it's something that we live with in Singapore on a daily basis, right? It's an endemic issue. If the wines just start to get hot the minute they're out of the fridge, so it's a big problem for us here. So I'd say that comparing my time in Australia to my time in Singapore, consumers here are way ahead of the curve in terms of temperature control and getting it right. Yeah, Lloyd, I agree with you. Australians drink wine far too hot. You're right. Yeah, we're much more on the ball with regards to that. Yeah. All right, shall we move to the Shiraz? That's going to be number 5.
I would do Grenache before the Shiraz, I'd say.
Oh, okay, sure. So number 6.
So we've got the 18 Grenache. So prior to working at Turkey Flat, I mainly had made Pinot and Chardonnay in cooler climates. I was originally from South Australia, and I was keen to come back here and got a job working at Turkey Flat. And I immediately fell in love with Grenache. At that time, sort of 11 or 12 years ago, it was really underappreciated. It was very much Shiraz's sort of, uglier brother.
Yeah.
But it was, you could see it was the beauty of the Barossa. It was meant to be grown here. And so that started a love affair with me playing around in the winery, exploring what it can be, and importantly, drinking Grenache from around the world to see what the best examples look like. And I quickly learned overripeness is a problem. Oak use is definitely a problem, and oxidative handling is definitely a problem too. The great strengths of Grenache, the best Grenache, it should be really freshly aromatic. And the best Grenache in the world is tannic. It is a tannic variety. It's a myth that it's not. When grown in the right spots, whether it's the high hills of France or Spain, or in particular parts of the Barossa, it's a tannic variety. You really need to think sort of that angular, granular tannin that comes with Nebbiolo, but in a far more sort of joyer, freshest sort of mouthfeel and aromatics. And so I went off my own little tangent, tweaking our style to get it to somewhere where I thought really represented good Grenache. But that yielded for us Jimmy Watson, so it's pretty special. So,
I think there's questions from your guys. We've actually skipped to the Grenache. I can see.
We're on number 6 now. The guys wanted us to look at the Grenache first, and we'll finish with the Shiraz number 5.
So really,
so Mark, if you can benchmark labels from around the world that have influenced your approach to making Grenache, could you share some of those with us?
Yeah, so Le Pallier from Gigondas. That was the lightning bolt moment. I think Nerf de Pape generally gets too ripe. And
they heavy sometimes. I agree. Yeah.
I bet Nerf de Pap's probably the famous. It puts Grenache on the. It gets people aware of Grenache, but I really think you need to have a look at the altitudes, and that drew me to Vacaras and Gigondas. And out of what's available in Australia was the Le Pallier wines, which is owned by Vue Telegraph. That really made me see what it could be.
Could do, yeah.
From there, I started drinking around Australia, trying to find the better vineyards that sort of had that tannic backbone, and ours had it. And then it was just trying to promote that freshness. But really, like I think good Grenache can be nothing else. It speaks of its variety and it speaks of place.
Yeah, I'm probably dating myself now, but when I first started drinking seriously in Oz, maybe 98, 99, really the only dudes who had Grenache that I found in Sydney was Charlie Melton and the Carrigan Hill stuff. And I remember around about 2002 drinking a bottle of one of the vintages, one of the sub vineyards of Carrigan Hills. It was an 82. So it was at least 20 years old. And for me, that was my come to Jesus moment with Grenache, because it just had, I'm not going to bang on too much about it now, but it certainly changed everything that I thought about Grenache. Because up to then, it was always something that was a bit of a donut filler in Australian wines. It was always in a GSM. It was never respected as a single varietal that I certainly had exposure to up until then. So I'm so appreciative of what you're doing with this.
Certainly, Charlie Melton was the flag bearer for a really long time for the Barossa. And I think Grenache is now the hot variety in Australia, and everyone's making it, everyone's talking about it. And I think Charlie Melton's like,
yeah,
it took this long.
Exactly right.
He made 9 Popes, which was a blend.
Yeah,
he didn't. Yeah, it was never a straight varietal. But he does make a straight varietal now.
Yeah, I don't. Excuse me. I don't remember years ago a straight varietal coming from. For me, it was the 9 Popes. That's how I first encountered his stuff.
First straight Grenache from Turkey Flat was 92.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so you
get the 99 Grenache. It's still aging really well.
Really, that's just. I think that's the really spectacular personality in Grenache, is this prodigious ability to go and go and go. Really amazing.
But everyone, please take note of that tannin shape in the wine. It sits, right? Shiraz always sits at the back, and it's chalkiness. It's like a defined minerality. It's a chalkiness that coats in a block. And when you get that, when you have a wine blind and you get that, you go, that's Grenache.
You know, yeah, for sure, got it. I think
when you lose that confection on the nose, I've never liked confection on the nose in Grenache, but it tends to leave after 3 years. In terms of your wines, when does that nose start to change to the more typical Grenache profile?
Well, if I have done my job properly a long time, I think that's a part of Grenache. I think the more oxidatively you handle it in the cellar, the quicker that'll disappear.
Right.
But for me, that's a critical part. That confection, which is a bright aromatic nose with those angular tannins, that to me is Grenache, and that's
okay. So you're looking to really work that nose and make that predominant thing.
Yeah,
that's the style. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, good.
If you go more oxidative and throw it around a bit more, you'll lose that freshness, and you'll go to more of those sort of savoury, leathery characters a bit quicker.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe not everyone's aware that this wine a couple of years ago won the Jimmy Watson, did it not, Christie?
Yes.
Yeah, which was extraordinary.
16 or 17, I can't remember, because we jumped as fast as we could, but I think it was all gone in a second. I can't remember which vintage it was. I think it was 16. 16, yeah. But Lou tells me that there's more of this 18 on the water, and getting to us in about a week, which is very, very good news.
Well, this has had heaps of accolades, so.
Yeah. I say our wines have had more bling than an African dictator. We picked up another couple of trophies last week. We want to stick on the labels as we can, but just know they're very well awarded, including this one.
Not quite like your balsamic blue.
You will get the bug, trust me, Christie. You'll get to learn what that's all about. In fact, you can have a bottle of it, no problem. Have it on me.
All right, shall we move to the Shiraz now? That's wine number 5 for those who got a little confused.
Wine number 6.
Yeah, wine number 6 is the Grenache. We did that first. We're going back to the Shiraz, wine number 5.
Bloody hell. Keep up. Bond.
So this has been listed as in WineArc's top 50 most collectible wines in Australia. And then the one note that really grabbed my imagination was Ned Goodwin talking about this light freshness in the Shiraz. I think for so long now, in the last 15, 20 years, Barossa Shiraz is trademarked in a certain old school style. And I really love how you guys have never really followed that. And it's certainly to the point on this one, this is really, really showing beautifully. There's an eloquence and nimbleness about the Shiraz, which if I tasted this blind, I'd put my last dollar on it not being Barossa. I wouldn't know where to put it, but I wouldn't be able to imagine that it's Barossa because of its sprightliness, I think, and eloquence.
I think Mark would be quite pleased with that description.
Yeah, not that I don't want wines that look like the Barossa. I just want them. I'd like them to seem of place.
Yeah.
I just want them to have a prettiness, a buoyancy to them. And the ability that you can actually have more than a glass. And wines that actually tell a story as they've been open for a bit longer as well.
Yeah.
But certainly the elegant Shiraz style, I inherited it at Turkey Flat. It's always been that style. It hasn't been a blown out style. And I've really enjoyed just really finer tweaks of trying to make, to just sort of, just tweaking that style as I've done the winemaking.
Yeah, and let your personality show through. I mean, I've got to say, I don't want to sound jaded and all the rest of it, but I'm really done with the Barossa Christmas cake, fruit cake, leather, smack across the chops. And then the other thing I'm finding, some really overworked Shirazes, expressions of Shiraz from there, where you guys have just extracted everything and just tried to create something with a goal in mind rather than letting the fruit speak through. And I think that's the difference between what they do and what you've achieved here.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's really the Parker effect. But that effect is the sun. It's not a hard trick to do. You leave it on the vine and you let it hang out, and the Barossa's got a lot of sun.
And it's going to get
super rich wines, but they're certainly opulent when they're young, and they're attractive because of that opulence. And to people who don't drink a lot of wine, they're drawn to them. But after 3 to 5 years, they show the faults of how they're made. They turn to Christmas cake and raisins. The fact that these wines live for a long time is just false.
But we're finding the younger palates are liking this style. It's only the older generation that are still looking for that old fruit cake, or maybe some Asian markets, not Singapore, which I don't call, but Korea, China, they're still looking for that rich. We don't fit that profile.
It's the point focused people, the people that want a brand on the table rather than actually knowing what they're drinking. Those richer styles.
I think these days, certainly my experience in Singapore is that's a negative effect. If you're drinking Australian now, to bring something that's 10 or 15 years old and is just a big pointer, in even moderately scholarly wine circles, it's not going to hold water anymore. You know, it really, things have moved on from a consumer point of view as well, not just in terms of chasing the points, which is good to know, good to see.
Nice to know as a producer that as well. The world's waking up because we put a lot of effort into the wines, and when people just gravitate to these rich styles, please, there's more to it.
I'm aware that we're taking a bit of time. Are there any questions from the chat room that I haven't raised? There's a complaint from Lloyd that we've got more than a tasting portion. I'm sorry, mate. The idea with the size of portions we have is enough for 2 or 1 very thirsty Australian. I thought that made reasonable sense.
He doesn't have to drink it all.
Exactly.
Back on the Shiraz, you're drinking the Shiraz from the 17 vintage, which was one of the cooler vintages we've had, but not so cool that it was diseasey like 2011.
Yeah.
But 2017 is my favourite Shiraz to ever come out of, or anything that I've had my hands on, just because of the coolness just worked to the style that we make. So it's like a lusciousness to it. There's a velvetness to it, but there's a freshness over the whole wine.
I think that's in the butcher's block as well that you saw, which was 17.
Yeah, it sort of plays into that seamless, that character, you know, that sort of easy, beautiful, flowing characteristic that hotter vintages are definitely harder to achieve, certainly that persona. But it really does here. There's various other people saying there's absolutely no complaints on the volumes. So thank you very much. I'm glad I've got that right. Dave's asking about a celery recommendation for that Rhone, the white blend.
If you're happy with the development now, you could easily go for another 5 or 6 years.
It's very hard to have that in my fridge for another 5 or 6 years. I think it's
Which wine?
The white, the first one we had.
Okay.
Really, really delicious.
You can already see if that doesn't suit you, then you can go longer.
Yeah.
I'll just drink it now, Robert.
Yeah, no, there's none left in my glass, which is a dangerous sign being a Thursday night. I've got a couple of hours work.
Rob, before we wrap up, for the first time, we'll be bringing up two new offerings from Turkey Flat on this shipment. One is their Pedro Ximénez. So Christie and Mark might want to talk about that. I've resisted the temptation to bring it up on the basis of diabetes, but we're going to bring it up this time. There's been a lot of demand for the Pedro Ximénez that they make down there. And as well, they make this wild thing called Quinquina, I think it's called, or Quinquina, which, Rob, you and I will have to have a look at. It's vermouth.
What do you do with it?
It's a vermouth type thing, so we might be able to mix up a new Negroni.
A new Negroni. Just when I thought I cornered the market on aged Negronis. That's fantastic.
So, Christie and Mark, you want to talk about those too? Because they're new to us.
On the Quinquina or QQ, we'll send you some videos and marketing information on that. But we've got all sorts of cocktails and things you can make from it. So it's bloody delicious in a hot climate.
If you can imagine really strong orange aromatics.
Okay, so Aperol kind of thing. That's going in that direction.
Yep.
Got it. Okay.
But it's we brew Cinchona bark with it, so it's very bitter.
Excellent. Jacob's got a question.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to hear about these wines and try them for sure. I like them a lot. I have a question regarding your red wines, because when I compare them to a lot of other red wines from Barossa and McLaren Vale, I find these red wines are maybe a little bit lighter and displaying a bit more red fruit than dark fruit compared to some of the really big and bold red wines that can come out of Barossa. I'm just wondering whether it's because you harvest slightly earlier than some of these more bolder styles, or is it something else that creates this style?
It's growing the vineyard to stress, so flavour comes into the berries earlier. It's much like if you're growing tomatoes or fruit or anything. If you stress them through lower nutrient and low water, they'll ripen earlier. So we do that in our vineyard, and then we use that to pick early. If you have a vineyard that's cropped high, so it's high in nutrient, you're not going to have flavour at lower sugar level. You have to hang it out. No,
that's okay. That's okay. Let me just. Sorry, mate. Carry on.
So it's very much a two-part answer to that. We grow our vineyards to get flavour early, and then we pick it.
So are you saying that you're picking earlier than some of the other winemakers, or?
Yeah, one of our Shiraz vineyards, we pick a month earlier than our neighbour.
All right.
So absolutely. But we grow the vineyard specifically to get flavour early, so we can pick early.
So we're not getting green flavours; it's ripe flavour.
Sure.
And that's the key.
Peter, I think that the declaration of the white, being CDP-esque is exactly spot on. I think that Mark and Christie would probably agree. It echoes the CDP, but still has its roots in the Barossa. I think that, as a marketer, that's what I'd say.
Sounds good.
All right, guys, I know it's getting late in the Barossa. Thank you so much for coming. I hope we can get you online again in not too distant future. It was fantastic talking about Grenache with you, Mark. It was really great. And I'm thinking at the back of my mind, we might put together a Grenache showdown and pull some guns from all around the world and have you guys taste them with us online. Be fantastic. I'll see if I can figure that out.
That would be brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk about the Pedro, if you want to have a quick.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, please.
Please make sure that your customers chill it.
Mm-hmm.
We always serve it chilled.
Yeah, it's essentially it's a sweet style oxidized sherry.
Yeah.
And it's grown under a little bit of a floor, so it's quite nutty, but it does have a bit of sweetness in there. And it definitely needs to go in the fridge, and it can be served as an aperitif because it's not too sweet, or with a dessert.
Can do.
It works savoury and sweet. We have gone to Vinalock. So we do get customers ringing us complaining they can't get it out. You just have to ease it up. It does, the top comes out, but we're totally away from cork.
All right, that's terrific. We'll keep an eye open for that. We might, once it's out, we might do a bit of a one-on-one with you guys with that. It'd be great to taste those online with you. So once again, thanks so much. It was fantastic talking to you, and hope you
thank you very much.
Thanks so much. See you guys.
Giving us